For 500 years, through enslavement, colonial policy, and repression, the West managed to form a global capitalist system, which for many years ensured the dominance of Western countries over the rest of the world. Since the mid-20th century, the United States has become the leader of this global capitalist system. For decades, globalists in Washington have successfully developed and maintained a unipolar world system. During this time, globalists turned the West and its so-called golden billion into the center of the world. In this unipolar world, hegemony and complete domination belonged only to the West, while the rest of the countries, including Russia, were thrown into the zone of so-called peripheral capitalism. All this allowed the globalists to strengthen the unipolar world and eliminate any threats to the global dominance of the West. For decades, globalists in Washington have imposed sanctions, declared wars, and staged color revolutions against those countries that tried to show independence and develop their economies. The truth is that the West, led by globalists, does not need economically strong and independent countries, even among its so-called allies. The fact is that the economic and geopolitical development of the rest of the world weakens the dominance of the West, accelerating the process of the arrival of a multipolar world. And for many decades, it was Russia that was the main stimulator of this multipolar world. If we look at history, we see that all the wars that the West waged against Russia had only one goal: the weakening and destruction of this huge country. However, unfortunately for the West, Russia has always emerged victorious from these wars, and has only become stronger. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Sergei Lavrov, also drew attention to this fact. According to him, history repeats itself. Sergei Lavrov noted that the conflict in Ukraine, which the United States unleashed, made Russia only stronger, as it was after the victories over Adolf Hitler and Napoleon Bonaparte. According to Sergei Lavrov, in the 19th century, Napoleon united Europe against Russia, but in the end, he was defeated. In the 20th century, Adolf Hitler did the same thing. He forced almost all European countries to join the Wehrmacht and attack Russia. As a result, Hitler was overwhelmingly defeated, and Russia became much stronger after this war. And now, in the 21st century, the United States has also united all Western countries against Russia. Sergei Lavrov added that unfortunately for the West, another war, this time in Ukraine, has once again made Russia only stronger. And despite all the evidence that the weakening and destruction of Russia is a priority goal of globalists in Washington and London, many experts continue to argue that Moscow should be friends with the West and try to build trusting relationships. Sometimes, some so-called experts never cease to amaze me with their statements. When the so-called experts, as well as systemic and non-systemic liberals, declare that Russia doesn't need to quarrel with the West, that Russia needs to be friends with the West, open borders, cooperate, and so on, all this makes me laugh. Russia could have believed such statements 30 years ago, when it was very naive. Back then, in Russia, it seemed to many, even adequate people, that it was only necessary to remove the Iron Curtain and everything will get better. At that time, many believed that the West had no plans to destroy Russia, to pump out its resources. Many believed that everyone would live as friends on this planet. Of course, after a few years, all these naive thoughts disappeared. Instead of a peaceful existence, the West began to openly support those politicians who plundered Russia. Let me remind you that it was with the most direct participation of the West that predatory privatization took place in Russia. The globalists split off the countries of the former USSR from Russia, fostering Russophobic nationalist sentiments there. And NATO continued to expand to the east. But why did I say all this? As the history of Russia shows, the accelerated development of this huge country occurs only when it has an external enemy, when the citizens of Russia are in a state of geopolitical conflict. If relations with the West become friendly, this automatically means the degradation of Russia. After all, even if we look at the past 30 years, these 3 decades can be divided into the following periods. The 90s. Russia is friends with the West, which subsequently leads to the complete degradation of the country. In the period 2000 to 2014, Russia maintains neutrality with the West, which subsequently leads to stabilization and the solution of many internal political problems. From 2014 to the present day, Russia is in a state of confrontation with the West, which subsequently led to a radical change in the country's development vector and a complete restart of the economy. I want you to understand once and for all, one banal thing: the West is not interested in equal partnership and friendship with Russia. The West hates Russia on a subconscious level, because it understands that this huge country with its richest resources will never become a colony, or semi-colony of the West. Russians will never agree to give up their natural resources in exchange for Western goods. The West could impose such a model of relations on Russia for a while, but in the long term, it has no prospects. The accelerated development of Russia occurs only when it is in a state of conflict. Historically, the Kremlin begins to think about the development of Russia in deeds and not just in words, only in the event of an external threat. I still cannot understand, why didn't Kremlin create a national payment system before 2014? Russia could have easily created such a system. However, Moscow started creating it after there was a real threat of Russia's disconnection from SWIFT. Also, I cannot understand, why didn't Russia start import substitution before 2014? Moscow could do it without any problems. However, the Russian government began to do this only after Russia was sanctioned and deprived of access to advanced technologies. And I can give a huge number of such examples. Now we have a new round of geopolitical tensions. Perhaps even more significant than in 2014. Lavrov declared that if no compromise is reached, Russia's response will be military technical. There is only one thing you can be sure of, namely that something will surely happen. And, therefore, the escalation will increase. The Russian economy will work in mobilization mode. And this is Russia's chance. A chance to get rid of liberal monetarism, sending it to the dustbin of history. A chance to gain true economic sovereignty. Put an end to the fifth column inside the government. And it's only the beginning. It looks like the Russians are ready to go all the way. There is one important point in all this. I would advise Putin not to separate domestic and foreign policy. It is necessary to deal with all areas, since they are directly dependent on each other. Unfortunately, in terms of domestic policy, Russia has an imbalance. The fact is that Russia has a sovereign foreign policy, but at the same time its economy is still built into the globalist system of the world order. Putin must put an end to this. And the sooner he does that, the better it will be not only for Russia itself, but for the rest of the world. And judging by what is happening now, Putin is gradually achieving his goal. The Russian economy is gradually emerging from the influence of the globalist system. The current war in Ukraine and unprecedented Western sanctions have allowed Russia to unleash its full potential both on the battlefield and in the economic arena. Russia's economy has become much stronger and continues to develop rapidly, while its army has gained invaluable experience in waging war against NATO armies. Thus, we can conclude that history has indeed repeated itself. Another war unleashed by the globalists has made Russia great again.